Thank you for watching Amir Shakil 5858. I am Amir Budnam. I am thankful to all news resources and my team. Following are the news which have been reported by American, European, Asian, Canadian, African, and Australian channel, and of course the news agencies AFP, AP, and Reuters. Now the headlines. Russia attacked Ukraine again yesterday with bombs and missiles in different cities. America has stopped shipment of weapons to Israel, which included big bombs. Chinese president left France and arrived in Serbia, where he got warm welcome. Canada arrested 2 Indians for the murder of Sikh leader. Israeli assault is continued in Rafah, Gaza. There is a shortage of essential items in Gaza. Protesters were expelled from Georgetown University. France expects that China will play a positive role in Russia-Ukraine war. Russian-Ukraine war. Now the news headline details.
On this Wednesday night, new details about how 2 accused hitmen entered Canada. How they got student visas is under scrutiny.
If you want a visa to come to Canada, one of these.
The U.S. suspends bomb shipments to Israel as Palestinians scramble to escape Rafah while they can.
We don't know where we will go.
Another rough ride, the latest mishap involving a Boeing plane. And a battle of the Wild Wild West.
We're all just so excited for the Stanley Cup, especially 2 Canadian teams.
Gearing up for Game 1 between the Oilers and the Canucks.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. Global News has confirmed 2 of the Indian men accused of killing a BC Sikh leader came to Canada on student visas, and that 1 took just days to obtain. They're charged with first-degree murder in the killing of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, who was shot outside a Gurdwara in Surrey, BC last year. Canada's Prime Minister has said there is credible evidence linking the Indian government to the murder. How the men got into Canada is also under scrutiny. Jeff Semple has new details in tonight's top story.
That's Indian national Karan Brar announcing he received his student visa from Canada and thanking an immigration company for their help. That company posted the video on its Facebook page in 2019. 3 years later, Brar allegedly murdered BC Sikh leader Hardeep Nijjar.
This is a screaming wake-up call to Ottawa.
Sources close to the investigation say police believe India's foreign intelligence agency was responsible for Nijjar's murder. Officers arrested 3 alleged hitmen, including Brar, in Edmonton Friday. Sources say at least 2 of the accused came to Canada on student visas. But instead of studying, sources say they were involved in drug trafficking and organized crime, with links to India's notorious Bishnoi gang.
It's the easiest country, safest country.
This organized crime expert says Canada's international student visa program is well known to Indian gangs.
So you do anything from here, it's much safer.
Sources believe the suspects were involved in organized crime before coming to Canada, but it's unclear if Brar had a criminal record.
If someone were on a student visa, would there be criminal record checks?
Yes.
There would be?
Yeah. Despite that claim from Canada's immigration minister, immigration lawyers and the government's own website say Canada does not require a criminal record check from student visa applicants from India.
Canadian government, Canadian immigration expects you to be truthful about your background and your criminal history. But as we all know, not everyone tells the truth.
In the video, Brar says he received his student visa within days. The company that assisted his application, Ethic Works Immigration Services, is headquartered in India's Punjab state. It lists 2 Canadian addresses in Saskatchewan and this home in Ontario. No one would answer the door.
Mr. Singh, from Ethic Works?
But through the doorbell camera, they said they know nothing about the case. There's no suggestion the company did anything wrong. Brar had been accepted into this Calgary college in its hospital unit clerk program in 2020. The program lasts 8 months, which means his student visa should have expired 3 years ago. It's unclear whether he completed his studies or even attended class.
Right now, there's a lack of uniform and consistent collection of who's showing up to school.
This immigration lawyer says communication between schools and immigration officials is lacking.
We have a screen door on the submarine. By the time we find out something's amiss, it's too late.
Facing criticism about the surging number of international students, the federal government announced changes to the program in January, including a cap for the next 2 years. Meanwhile, Brar and his 2 co-accused will be back in court on May 21st. The charges against them have not been proven. Donna?
All right, Jeff Semple, thanks. U.S. President Joe Biden has taken his strongest action yet to try to deter Israel from launching a full-scale assault on Rafah. In an interview with CNN, Biden acknowledged American bombs have been used to kill civilians in Gaza and that he will not continue to supply Israel with offensive weapons if the Israeli army goes into Rafah. That's Gaza's southernmost city where more than 1 million Palestinian civilians are sheltering.
It's just wrong. We're not going to supply the weapons and artillery shells used that have been used.
Artillery shells as well?
Yeah, artillery shells.
Jackson Prosco reports on what is a major shift in U.S. policy.
The rush is on to flee Rafah. As civilians prepare for Israel's ground offensive, there are few places to run. This is the 3rd time we are displaced, says this man. We don't know where we will go. Airstrikes are already raining down on southern Gaza. Aid organizations warn a full invasion will lead to an even deeper humanitarian catastrophe.
So the impact is not just on the people in Rafah, the impact is throughout Gaza because it collapses what remains of the, even as it is woefully insufficient, aid operation.
Israel's months-long military campaign would not have been possible without American-made bombs and artillery shells, which have killed and maimed thousands of Palestinians. Yet for the first time, the U.S. acknowledged withholding a shipment of 3,500 high-impact bombs to Israel as a way to signal concern over what could come next and perhaps pressure Israel to change course.
Israel should launch a major attack into Rafah without accounting for and protecting the civilians that are in that battle space.
Yet Israel's defense minister warns their mission is not finished, hinting at a future operation along Israel's northern border with Lebanon. We have to prepare for continuing, he told his troops, warning of what he called a hot summer in the fight against Hezbollah, while the U.S. is preparing for the humanitarian crisis to continue in Gaza. In Cyprus, a ship was loaded with aid, destined to be the first cargo delivered to a newly completed floating pier off Gaza. Back in Rafah, there's fear this next desperate move may not be the last. We are going into the unknown, says this man, as he packed up his few belongings. Jackson Crosco, Global News, Washington.
In the U.S., police have cleared a pro-Palestinian encampment at George Washington University and arrested 33 people. Police moved in overnight when dozens of protesters marched to the home of the university president. The police chief said there were signs the protest was becoming more volatile and less stable. City officials were scheduled to testify on Capitol Hill today about why they had not cleared the encampments. That hearing has now been cancelled. Global Affairs Canada has confirmed a Canadian has been killed in Egypt. It says it's providing consular assistance to the family, but didn't give any other information. The Israeli embassy in Ottawa confirms a man with both Israeli and Canadian citizenship was murdered in Egypt and that he owned a business in Egypt. The Egyptian government said on social media it's investigating after a Canadian businessman permanently residing in the country was exposed to a criminal shooting incident in Alexandria. Russia launched what Ukrainian authorities call a massive attack on the country's power grid overnight. Russian missiles and drones struck nearly a dozen energy facilities, causing major damage to at least 3 Soviet-era power plants. The attack led to blackouts in multiple regions. Ukraine's Air Force says it shot down 39 of 55 Russian missiles and all but 1 of the 21 drones. In Manitoba, the trial of the man accused of murdering 4 Indigenous women and disposing of their bodies heard his confession to police. Jeremy Skibicki admitted he killed the women, but his defense lawyers say he's not criminally responsible because of a mental disorder. A warning, details of the crimes are disturbing. The prosecution argues Skibicki devised a calculated scheme, preying on women at Winnipeg shelters, inviting them back to his home, killing them, and disposing of them as if they were garbage. Melissa Ridgen is following the trial. Melissa.
Donna, we heard for the first time Jeremy Skibicki, an interview that he had with homicide investigators. For 3 hours under police interrogation, he denied involvement in Rebecca Contois' death, only admitting that he knew her, and then a bombshell. I have a lot more information. I just want a priest to confess my sins. That's what he told investigators, and went on to say, I just wanted to see how far I could take things because the criminal justice system is a joke. And I killed 4 people, okay? It was at that moment police knew they had a serial killer on their hands. Skibicki told investigators he frequently used meth and looked for women victims at downtown shelters. In addition to Contois, Skibicki named them all. Morgan Harris and Mercedes Myron, who at that point were missing. He named a 4th victim, but police found her alive. To this day, the identity of that 4th victim is unknown. Prosecutors say he lured the women to his apartment and had sex with them before choking them and disposing of their bodies in the garbage. Skibicki's legal team says he suffers from a mental disorder and had a meth addiction, arguing he should be found not criminally responsible. Police believe Harris and Myron and possibly a 4th victim referred to as Buffalo Women are in a landfill north of Winnipeg. The federal and provincial governments have committed $40 million to start that search once the criminal matter wraps up here. It's scheduled for 6 weeks here. Donna.
All right, Melissa Ridgen in Winnipeg, thank you. Hundreds of charges have been laid after a sweeping investigation in Ontario into child sexual exploitation. Police say 64 people have been arrested.
With each passing year, the tools used by predators who wish to harm our children grow more sophisticated and harder to trace. From advanced encryption to the dark web, these factors add to the complexity of police investigations.
Police say the focus was on people who make, access, and distribute child sexual abuse material, and that 34 child victims have been identified. 30 of them have been safeguarded, meaning they were removed from a dangerous situation. The ages of those charged range from 16 to 89, and more than 600 digital devices were seized. Investigators say the rise of artificial intelligence is making it difficult to determine whether video and images appearing online are real. In Ontario, a funeral took place today for the 3-month-old boy killed in a crash last week during a high-speed police chase. Family and friends gathered to say goodbye to Aditya Vivan. His grandparents, who were visiting from India, were also killed. Police cruisers pursued a cargo van traveling in the wrong direction down the busy 401 highway. The chase ended in a multi-vehicle crash. The baby's parents were seriously injured, but they survived. And in a statement, they say they are mourning the loss of 3 of the most precious people in our lives. Ontario's police watchdog is reviewing what happened. Unions representing hundreds of thousands of federal public servants are not happy with new rules intended to get workers back into the office 3 days a week. The unions say they weren't consulted, and employees don't want to give up working from home. The government says it isn't planning to back down, and as Abigail Beeman reports, public opinion may be on their side.
A dramatic picture painted by unions.
Bedbugs, bats, mice, cockroaches, mold, odors, poor air quality, missing or broken equipment, trash littering workstations.
About the apparent consequences of telling public servants to go back to the office 3 days a week, up from the current 2.
Forcing our members to wait in traffic, waste time setting up their workstation to sit in an unassigned desk, disconnected from their colleagues to take video calls all day is completely ridiculous.
Attempting to book a seat for the week is now like trying to get tickets to a Taylor Swift concert.
Unions concerned about not enough office space, especially with the government's plan to sell off more buildings. They say they weren't consulted, they're taking legal action, and they'll use every recourse they have, talking about coordinated actions on the streets and in the workplace, but they won't reveal tactics yet.
We're not just looking to go back to 2 days a week. We're here to say we're ready to fight to scrap the entire in-office policy of this government now.
The Trudeau Liberal government better prepare itself for a summer of discontent.
A hybrid work environment is not within the collective agreements.
Ottawa is not backing down, noting a 4-month transition period.
Most important thing is to continue to deliver services for Canadians and to protect taxpayer dollars.
Taxpayer dollars? And what about taxpayer opinions? Many outside the public service have long been back at the office full-time since COVID.
I think government employees should work in a government office. People that work at home, I don't believe, give you 8 hours a day work.
Working from home, it kind of, creates a part of laziness in some person's mind.
I find myself personally more productive working at the office.
As long as they're working, they do their job. I think it doesn't matter at home or in the office.
I certainly do work from home.
Do you think it's productive?
Absolutely. I'm on the clock right now. Picking up stuff for my job.
Abigail Beeman, Global News, Ottawa.
London Drugs is apologizing after it closed all of its 79 stores for more than a week because of a cyber attack. In a letter addressed to customers, the company's CEO called it one of the most challenging times in the retail chain's history. He says there is no evidence that the customer databases were compromised. London Drugs says it is still investigating. It's not clear who was behind the cyber attack. A frightening moment caught on camera, coming up why this Boeing plane landed without its front wheels.
Yango.
Severe storms ripped across the U.S. Midwest Tuesday evening, destroying homes and buildings. Tornadoes were reported in parts of Michigan, Indiana, and Ohio. One of them destroyed a FedEx facility where dozens of people were trapped inside. No one there was seriously hurt. Tonight, nearly 4 million Americans are under a severe thunderstorm warning. It has been an extremely active storm season in the U.S. There have been more than 300 tornadoes recorded since April. A FedEx cargo plane was forced to make a rough landing at Istanbul airport after its front landing gear failed to deploy. The Boeing 767 touched down after crew members informed air traffic control its front wheels weren't working. Sparks and smoke billowed as the nose scraped along the runway. Emergency crews were standing by. They quickly doused the aircraft with firefighting foam when it came to a stop, and no one was injured. Too much, too soon ahead how Alberta's campaign to attract new residents could backfire. The third phase of an ad campaign called Alberta is Calling has rolled out in Ontario, Quebec, and BC. Alberta's government is trying to entice skilled trades workers to make the move to Wild Rose Country, and the sweetener is a $5,000 tax credit. But Alberta already has a flood of new residents, and there's growing concern the province is moving too fast. Heather Yorks West explains.
He may still work remotely for his employer in Ontario, but Anthony in Brogno has left his life in Ottawa behind.
I made the choice to pack up and come back to Calgary. This is where I was born.
Connections with family helped shape his decision more than a year ago, and in Brogno is not alone.
According to Statistics Canada, in 2022 and 2023, more than 87,000 people moved to Alberta from other parts of Canada, many coming from BC, Ontario, and Quebec, likely in search of a more affordable life. Tell me about this unit.
But with the influx of people, Alberta's affordability has started to wane.
It is very challenging because, most homes that you are coming across, condos, townhouses, houses, you're having to compete against many other buyers.
Realtor Brent Wilcox says his out-of-province clients are having a tough time. Soaring demand has driven up home prices at a time where there isn't a lot of housing to go around. It's why the province says they're putting out another recruitment call.
It's laser focused on attracting skilled trades that we need to build Alberta's houses, schools, hospitals, and job creating infrastructure.
With an estimated 20,000 job vacancies in the skilled trades alone, the province has launched a new Move to Alberta campaign, offering a $5,000 tax credit to tradespeople who come to work and stay.
Obviously, talent is essential. It's the driving economic force of any community or any region. But you have to ensure that you balance supply and demand.
Difficult for a province prone to booms and busts. Alberta is clamoring for workers and residents today, but who knows for how long. Heather Yorks West, Global News, Calgary.
And then there were two next, the last Canadian teams in the Stanley Cup playoffs prepare to face off. It is a big night in hockey. The first ever playoffs in the Professional Women's Hockey League get underway. 4 teams are competing for this. The Walter Cup, which is made of sterling silver, weighs 35 pounds and stands just over 2 feet tall. Toronto, as the top seed, opens their semi-final best-of-5 series against Minnesota tonight. The winner will take on the winner of Montreal versus Boston, which starts tomorrow. As for the NHL, if you're a Leafs fan or a Jets fan, you have to get over your sadness. And if you care about a Canadian team advancing, you can cheer for either the Edmonton Oilers or the Vancouver Canucks. That series starts tonight in Vancouver. As Neetu Garcha reports, the excitement in both cities is through the roof.
Preparations are in full swing outside Rogers Arena in Vancouver, with anticipation reaching a fever pitch ahead of an all-Canadian Western Conference semi-final.
They're fast and they're furious, and I'm so excited. I wish them luck, but I don't think they're going to have it.
As the excitement builds, so does the rivalry, spilling over into unexpected places like this Boston Pizza restaurant in Penticton, BC, which found itself in the crossfire for displaying a Let's Go Oilers sign despite being in Canucks territory. It's since been changed to a more neutral message.
There's not many playoff matchups to build big geographical rivalries.
As fans spar on social media, the Alberta and BC premiers making a bet on the series outcome as the mayors of Edmonton and Vancouver make a wager of their own.
We'd like for you to fly the flag of our beloved Canucks.
So get ready to wear that jersey on the day Canucks lose.
Ahead of the Canucks and Oilers' first playoff game against each other since 1992, memories of Vancouver's 2011 riot are front of mind for some.
The emotional pleas from both sides. It looks like it's getting a bit ugly early. Vancouver has a little bit of a history of going overboard if they get beat.
Police in Vancouver are preparing as the city gets set to open public viewing spaces over the weekend.
We will continue to deploy as many officers as needed to maintain public safety.
And local businesses are gearing up for a surge in customers.
It really is an unparalleled vibe and feeling in the city.
And remembering the legacy of Canucks coach Roger Nielsen and his infamous white towel protest, fans will have their white towels out tonight, a symbol of the passion and history that defines this age-old rivalry. Neetu Garcha, Global News, Vancouver.
It's a series. That is Global National for this Wednesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is Wascana Lake in Regina. If you'd like to see Your Canada, please email it to viewers@globalnational.com. And thanks for watching. Farah Nasser will be here at the Anchor Desk tomorrow. For now, bye-bye.
This news is funded by viewers like you. Please support our work at democracynow.org/give. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The United Nations warning Gaza could run out of fuel and drinking water today following Israel's seizure of the Rafah border crossing. Israel's facing mounting global pressure not to launch a broader ground invasion of Rafah, where more than 1.4 million displaced Palestinians have sought refuge. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres warned there's no safe place for people in Rafah to go.
Even the best friends of Israel are clear. An assault on Rafah would be a strategic mistake, a political calamity, and a humanitarian nightmare. I appeal to all those with influence over Israel to do everything in their power to help avert even more tragedy.
Doctors in Rafah are warning Israel's seizing of the border crossing and its intensifying attacks on eastern Rafah could lead to thousands of more deaths. Marwan Al-Hams is the director of Abu Yusuf Al-Najjar Hospital in Rafah, which was forced to close and evacuate its patients Tuesday due to Israeli military operations.
The closure of the Rafah crossing means the death of thousands of patients, thousands of injured will be murdered. Nutritional resources, medical resources, and humanitarian aid won't enter the Gaza Strip, which means more diseases, more patients needing treatment that isn't available, more patients with chronic diseases, new diseases we won't find medication for, and therefore the number of patients will pile up.
The Israeli newspaper Haaretz reports Israel's planning to hand control of the Rafah border crossing to a private U.S. security company. The paper did not name the firm, but said it was made up of veterans of elite U.S. Army units. Meanwhile, the New York Times has confirmed reports the Biden administration withheld sending 3,500 bombs to Israel last week out of fear the bombs could be used to attack Rafah. But the administration's gone ahead with approving another $827 million for other weapons and equipment for the Israeli military. This comes as Politico reports the Biden administration's indefinitely delayed issuing a report to determine whether Israel's violated U.S. and international law in its war on Gaza. Negotiations are continuing in Cairo, 2 days after Hamas agreed to a ceasefire proposal mediated by Egypt and Qatar. On Tuesday, family members of hostages held in Gaza rallied in Tel Aviv. This is Shahar Mor Zahiro, whose uncle Avraham Munda is being held hostage.
We heard from sources involved in the negotiations that the one thing preventing this deal from happening, the one thing separating us from the return of our loved ones, was and remains an Israeli guarantee of an end to this war. To Netanyahu and the government of Israel, we clearly say from this stage, if the only way to get the hostages back is by providing an Israeli guarantee to end this war, then end this war. Bring them back and save their lives.
The police crackdown on peaceful student protesters continues across the United States. In Illinois, police cleared an encampment at the University of Chicago. Here in New York, police forces raided a protest camp at the Fashion Institute of Technology, arresting dozens of protesters Tuesday. Meanwhile, in Europe, police arrested more than 100 activists at University of Amsterdam. Police also dismantled an encampment at Berlin's Free University. Despite the police repression, new encampments continue to form. In Cambridge, Massachusetts, students at MIT restarted a Gaza Solidarity encampment. Meanwhile, at the Rhode Island School of Design, RISD, students barricaded themselves inside a campus building, which they renamed Fatih Ben Hall, after the acclaimed Palestinian artist who died after being unable to get care in Gaza. This is Santiago Alvarado of RISD Students for Justice in Palestine.
Fatih Ben is a Palestinian artist who was martyred after being unable to receive treatment because of the Israeli occupation. As artists, I believe that it is our moral duty to call for an end to genocide.
Here in New York, a local real estate developer was arrested after driving his car into a crowd of pro-Palestinian protesters who gathered outside the home of a Columbia University trustee. The driver has been identified as Reuven Kahana. He's a cousin of the late extremist Jewish Rabbi Meir Kahana, who publicly advocated for ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. Meir Kahana served one term in Israel's Knesset before he was convicted of acts of terrorism. Meanwhile, in Arizona, a research scholar at Arizona State University named Jonathan Udelman has been placed on leave after he was filmed harassing a woman in a hijab in Tempe. On Tuesday, President Biden spoke at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum's Days of Remembrance. He condemned what he called a ferocious surge of anti-Semitism in the United States.
My commitment to the safety of the Jewish people, the security of Israel, and its right to exist as an independent Jewish state is ironclad, even when we disagree.
The group Jewish Voice for Peace criticized Biden's speech, saying he, quote, disgraced the memory of the Holocaust by using our history of persecution to justify the Israeli military's genocide of Palestinians, unquote. Meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, Senator Bernie Sanders announced plans to introduce a resolution to condemn bigotry in all forms.
No to anti-Semitism, no to Islamophobia, no to all forms of racism and bigotry.
Adult film star Stormy Daniels testified Tuesday about her brief affair with Donald Trump. That's at the center of the criminal hush money case against the former president. Daniels' testimony prompted Trump's legal team to request a mistrial, but Judge Juan Merchan rejected the motion. The judge also ordered Trump to stop audibly cursing during the trial. Meanwhile, in a major development in another Trump case, federal judge Aileen Cannon has indefinitely postponed Trump's trial over his mishandling of classified documents. Cannon, who is a Trump appointee, said there are too many pretrial issues to resolve before a trial date could be set. In Brazil, search and evacuation efforts continue for survivors of catastrophic floods in the southern state of Rio Grande do Sul, as the death toll has reached at least 90 people. Over 130 are still missing. The city of Porto Alegre has been almost entirely cut off by the flooding. The airport and bus stations closed while main roads blocked. Tens of thousands have been left without a home, forced to sleep in the street, while others are fleeing to other regions on foot. Survivors are also struggling to find food and other basic necessities. Chinese President Xi Jinping has arrived in Serbia after visiting France, where he began his first European trip in 5 years. Xi arrived in Belgrade on the 25th anniversary of NATO's deadly bombing of the Chinese embassy in Belgrade on May 7, 1999, during the war in Kosovo. The attack killed 3 Chinese nationals. The state of Florida and the Catholic Medical Association have sued the Biden administration over a new federal rule protecting transgender people from discrimination in healthcare access. The policy was published by the U.S. Health and Human Services Department Monday and draws from an anti-discrimination provision in the Affordable Care Act. Florida law bans gender-affirming care for trans children and youth. And a cleaning company based in Tennessee has been fined over $649,000 after a U.S. Labor Department investigation found it was employing at least 24 children, some as young as 13 years old, to clean slaughterhouses and meatpacking plants. Fayette Janitorial Service was found to have hired children to work overnight cleaning shifts, at times using corrosive materials to clean, quote, dangerous kill floor equipment at facilities in Sioux City, Iowa, and Accomack, Virginia. On Monday, New York Times reporter Hannah Dreier won a Pulitzer Prize for exposing how thousands of migrant children, most of them from Mexico and Central America, risk their lives working at meatpacking plants and factories. Go to democracynow.org to see our interview with Hannah Dreier, as well as other Pulitzer winners this year, including Nathan Thrall, Justin Elliott, and Jonathan Eig. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
Tonight, several breaking stories as we come on the air. Tornadoes touching down across several states, and a threat right now across multiple states. Ginger will take us through it. Also breaking at this hour, the move just moments ago to try to oust House Speaker Mike Johnson, the vote, and how this went. Rachel Scott live on the Hill. And the dramatic images tonight, you'll see the Boeing 767 forced to land without nose gear. First tonight, multiple states under tornado alerts at this hour, from Texas to Missouri. A tornado touching down north of Nashville. A confirmed EF2 in Michigan, destroying homes. The new danger tonight, and this system moves into the east tomorrow. Ginger Z with the latest forecast. At this hour, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene making good on her threat, forcing a vote to oust House Speaker Mike Johnson. That vote just moments ago. The booze inside the chamber and how this went. Rachel Scott live on the Hill. Tonight, the battleground state of Wisconsin, a state that will help decide this election. The new poll just out tonight, Biden-Trump, and President Biden is there with a major announcement from Microsoft. And Biden asking voters, what about the promise Trump once made in Wisconsin? What happened to that? Tonight, sources telling ABC News there is frustration within the Israeli government and disappointment over President Biden's decision to pause the shipment of thousands of bombs as Israel now moves into Rafah. What the president said about this just moments ago, and where do these ceasefire talks stand at this hour with so many hostages still being held? The eye-opening headlines tonight involving presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. The New York Times reporting on a deposition during which RFK Jr. said doctors once found a parasite, a dead worm, in his brain. RFK Jr. reportedly saying he suffered memory loss. What his campaign is now saying about this tonight. The scare at a middle school today, students and teachers sickened, some taken to the hospital. The readings inside one classroom. The cruise ship stabbing spree tonight, a crew member arrested, several injured, including a 75-year-old passenger. That alarming sight on the runway, a FedEx jet forced to land without its nose gear. Tonight, the major headline here involving the former interpreter and close friend of Dodger star Shohei Ohtani. At America Strong tonight, the baby's born, one named Johnny Cash, the other named June Carter, in the same hospital. Their families had no idea. From ABC News World Headquarters in New York, this is World News Tonight with David York. Good evening, it's great to have you with us here to Wednesday night, and we begin tonight with breaking news. The vote just moments ago, the sudden effort to oust House Speaker Mike Johnson, the booze in the chamber as this went down, how this ended. We'll go live to Rachel Scott. But first, these horrific tornadoes touching down across several states, and the threat right now across multiple states. At least 10 states in the path tonight, more than 50 million Americans on alert. Dallas to St. Louis to Raleigh. Tomorrow, severe storms for Texas, the Gulf states, and then the system pushes right into the East Coast. The images here tonight, this tornado, part of the severe weather that hit Rush County, Indiana, Kalamazoo County, Michigan, hit hard as well by at least one confirmed tornado. A confirmed EF2, winds 135 miles an hour, ripping this FedEx facility to shreds. Workers inside were okay, but it was terrifying as it hit. Ginger Z watching the tornado threat right now. This is serious across 10 states, then moving into the east. We'll get to her forecast. And Alex Perez in the storm zone tonight.
Violent tornado! Violent tornado!
Another dangerous and potentially deadly night ahead. With that multi-day severe weather outbreak now targeting new cities and towns. A life-threatening tornado in southern Illinois, staff at our station WSIL taking cover.
I'm going to go ahead and run into that storm shelter as well.
Our Nashville station WKRN tracking another tornado on the ground north of the city.
I really want my friends in Springfield to get down to the lowest level center of a room. Don't chance it.
An EF2 tornado, winds of at least 111 miles per hour, ripping the roofs off these condos in Hot Springs, Arkansas.
Tornado.
And the first ever tornado emergency.
Oh, we have seen it.
The absolute highest level of danger issued in the state of Michigan. Powerful winds taking down nearly every tree in this front yard in Kalamazoo. At this mobile home community nearby,
Good God, you guys made it out of there alive?
homes is smashed to bits.
Oh, that hits me with gas.
As many as a dozen people injured. Part of the roof of this massive FedEx facility collapsing. About 50 people were trapped inside. Thankfully, all made it out safely. Karen Taggart is clearing down trees from his grandmother's house, telling our Alex Brachet it's a miracle she's okay.
Your brother was home during the storm.
Actually inside with a handicapped person, and she's elderly herself, and no basement in the house. The garage was coming off the foundation.
Michigan's Governor Gretchen Whitmer declaring a state of emergency.
And David, in just the last 2 days, we've seen more than 60 reported tornadoes. There are tornado and flood watches here in Paducah and across the region tonight. Those dangerous storms will continue well after dark. David?
May is always a dangerous month. Alex, thank you. Let's get right to Chief Meteorologist Ginger Z tracking it all again tonight for us. Hi, Ginger.
Hi, David. The atmosphere is so hyperactive this afternoon, and it will be as the sun sets and beyond. So let's go through the timing eventually here. But first, the immediate threat that watches that are on the map. Warnings, too, from Missouri through southern Illinois and Indiana, western Kentucky, much of Tennessee, and you start to see them bleed into Alabama, Georgia, and they've been now added all the way back to Texas. So Dallas-Fort Worth tonight in a tornado watch. Tyler as well. That's all going to come later this evening. But the severe thunderstorm watches are there, and the flood watches for Louisville and anyone in green there. Locally, you can see up to 4 inches fall very fast. So let's time it out. You see how the scattered storms that are happening all over Kentucky and Tennessee, well, they start to congeal a bit. That line back to Dallas happens kind of late evening till about midnight. But look what time it is when it erupts over northern Mississippi, Alabama, and western North Carolina. That's 4 a.m. So you're waking up to the thunderstorms that could have damaging winds and still some isolated tornadoes. Tomorrow, more damaging winds all across the south and southeast, David.
Right into the evening hours, and as you point out, very early tomorrow morning. Ginger Z, thank you again tonight. We turn to the other breaking headline just as we came on this evening. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene making good on her threat, forcing a vote to try to oust House Speaker Mike Johnson, surprising some of her Republican colleagues by doing it so suddenly late this afternoon. Well, that vote moments ago, the booze inside the chamber, and Rachel Scott always on the Hill.
Tonight, right-wing Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene stunning her fellow Republicans by forcing a vote to remove House Speaker Mike Johnson.
The form of the resolution is as follows. Declaring the office of Speaker of the House of Representatives to be vacant.
Greene had been threatening this move for weeks, angry that Johnson worked with Democrats to approve new funding for Ukraine.
Speaker Johnson's tenure is defined by one self-serving characteristic. When given a choice between advancing Republican priorities or allying with the Democrats to preserve his own personal power, Johnson regularly chooses to ally himself with Democrats.
But Greene had little support among her fellow Republicans, even Donald Trump urging her to back off. She did it anyway. Today, her GOP colleagues exasperated.
Reality of this is like the congressional version of a temper tantrum. Most of us, by the time we turn 12 years old, figure out that tantrums don't actually work, and apparently not everybody in Congress has got the memo.
The Greene's move tonight went nowhere, crashing and burning within an hour.
Hopefully, this is the end of the personality politics and the frivolous character assassination that has defined the 118th Congress. It's regrettable. It's not who we are as Americans, and we're better than this.
An overwhelming number of Democrats stepping in to save Johnson, joining with the majority of House Republicans. The question tonight, will Democrats be willing to save him a second time, should this happen again?
So let's get right to Rachel Scott live up on the Hill. Rachel, already one of the most chaotic Congresses in modern times, as you know. Another chapter here late today, as you point out, the Democrats joining many Republicans in saving Mike Johnson. But of course, the question, will they keep doing this?
Yes, and David, Republicans have a razor-thin majority in the House. House Speaker Mike Johnson could only afford to lose a single Republican. 11 voted against him. So it really was Democrats that had to step in and save his job. The Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries says he wanted to prevent the House from plunging into chaos once again. But tonight, Democrats say they are not making any promises that they would step in and save Johnson a second time if this happens again, David.
All right, Rachel Scott up on the Hill for us. Thank you, Rachel. There's also breaking news from President Biden tonight, what he has just said about Israel. Tonight, Israel frustrated and, quote, disappointed that the president has halted the shipment of thousands of bombs as Israel moves into Rafah. Well, just moments ago, the president saying of any Rafah invasion, we're not going to supply the weapons. Martha Raddatz with late reporting.
Tonight, with Israeli forces pummeling targets and expanding operations in Rafah, the U.S. for the first time acknowledging a major policy shift, pausing a shipment of thousands of bombs to Israel. Late today, President Biden giving his strongest warning yet.
Civilians have been killed in Gaza as a consequence of those bombs, but it's just wrong. We're not going to supply the weapons and artillery shells used. I've made it clear to BB and the War Cabinet. They're not going to get our support if, in fact, they go on these population centers.
Israel is growing increasingly frustrated with the U.S. over the decision. The concern is that the 3,500 bombs in that shipment could be used in Rafah, where more than 1 million civilians are sheltering. Officials pointing specifically to the destruction caused by 2,000-pound bombs in civilian areas. Bombs that can flatten buildings, their destructive power reaching hundreds of yards beyond a target. Bombs responsible for the deaths of thousands of civilians. The president's statement and the movement into Rafah putting pressure on all sides to reach a deal on a ceasefire, with the lives of many in Gaza and the fates of more than 100 hostages seized by Hamas in the terror attack on Israel hanging in the balance. But David, there is little progress yet. David?
Martha Raddatz, who continues to report on this war for us. Martha, thank you. The president's comments coming during an interview conducted in Wisconsin today. The president was there, of course, one of the key battleground states that will decide this election. The new poll just out tonight, Biden-Trump in that state. And President Biden was there with a major announcement from Microsoft and American Jobs. Here's Mary Bruce.
President Biden traveling to the critical battleground of Wisconsin today, where a new poll has him leading Donald Trump by the slimmest of margins. Biden there to announce Microsoft will build a $3.3 billion artificial intelligence center on the very same site of a failed Trump-era project that was supposed to create tens of thousands of jobs but never got off the ground.
It's going to be transformative, not just here, but worldwide. Not only significant investment in infrastructure of Racine, but for the people of Racine.
The Microsoft project is expected to create 2,300 union construction jobs and more than 2,000 permanent positions. 6 years ago at the same location, then President Trump heralded a $10 billion investment by electronics manufacturer Foxconn, promising to bring 13,000 jobs to the community.
This is the 8th wonder of the world.
But the project fizzled. The field where Trump once broke ground with golden shovels, now empty.
They dug a hole for those golden shovels, and then they fell into it. Foxconn turned out to be just that, a con. Go figure.
Biden eager to sell his economic accomplishments to skeptical voters.
My predecessor made promises which he broke, more than kept. He left a lot of people behind in communities like Racine. On my watch, we make promises and we keep promises. We leave no one behind.
Now, work on this new Microsoft project, we're told, is already underway. President Biden certainly well aware of that new poll out today, showing him leading Donald Trump in Wisconsin 50 to 44% in a two-way race. Meanwhile, Donald Trump has been complaining to reporters that he's stuck in court instead of out on the campaign trail. He did have the day off today, but instead of campaigning, he's hosting a dinner tonight at Mar-a-Lago for investors in his digital trading cards. David?
Mary Bruce at the White House for us. Mary, thank you. Meantime, there was an eye-opening headline tonight involving presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. The New York Times reporting on a 2012 deposition during which RFK Jr. said doctors once found a parasite, a dead worm, in his brain. Tonight, what his campaign is now saying about this, and here's Kane Whitworth.
Tonight, new questions about the health of independent presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. after he claimed a doctor discovered a dead worm in his brain. According to the New York Times, Kennedy testified in a 2012 deposition that he experienced memory loss at the time, saying, "I have cognitive problems, clearly." Kennedy said, "One of the doctors said it could have been caused by a worm that got into my brain and ate a portion of it and then died."
Most people will have at least some degree of cognitive impairment just because of the inflammation that goes on in the brain when a parasite has made a home for itself there, but there's really varying degrees to how severe that might be.
Kennedy testified he also suffered from mercury poisoning around the same time. Doctors interviewed by ABC News say both conditions could cause a wide range of health problems, but for most people, the impacts are often short-lived. The 70-year-old has touted himself as a physically fit alternative to President Biden, 81, and former President Trump, 77, the oldest candidates to ever run for the White House, even posting videos of himself doing push-ups and skiing with an Olympic gold medalist.
I go hike, and I hike uphill for a mile and a half up and a mile and a half down with my dogs, and I do my meditations. And then I go to the gym, and I go to the gym for 35 minutes.
And David, Kennedy's campaign tells us he did have a parasite, but that the issue was resolved more than 10 years ago, and that questioning his health is a hilarious suggestion, given his competition. David?
Kane Whitworth tonight. Kane, thank you. This evening, the scare for middle school students in San Jose. First responders rushing to a hazmat scare at their school. Fire officials say at least 8 children and 2 teachers were sickened at Sunrise Middle School. 2 students were hospitalized. The problem believed to be linked to chemicals in a science classroom. Tonight, through the staggering toll of the opioid epidemic on children in this country, new research finds between 2011 and 2021, 321,566 children lost a parent to a drug overdose. The rate of that loss more than doubled over the decade. This study reported in JAMA Psychiatry. When we come back here tonight, the alarming sight on the runway, the Boeing 767 forced to land without nose gear. Also tonight, the stabbing spree on a cruise ship. A crew member has been arrested. Among the victims tonight, a 75-year-old passenger. In a moment. Tonight, an alarming scene on the runway, a FedEx cargo plane flying from Paris to Istanbul, landing without its nose gear. The pilot had warned the control tower that the front landing gear would not deploy. The nose kicking up sparks on the runway. The 2 pilots on board were not hurt. Tonight, the stabbing spree on a Norwegian cruise ship sailing to Alaska. A crew member is facing multiple charges. The FBI says he tried to deploy a lifeboat while off Vancouver Island. He then allegedly stabbed a 75-year-old passenger and 2 security guards. Taken into custody, the victims are expected to recover. When we come back here tonight, the end of an era for a popular Chevy model. The car goes back decades. And then the 2 babies born down the hall from each other in the hospital. The families had no idea what the other family had named their baby. To be in other news tonight, the former interpreter for Dodger star Shohei Ohtani tonight has agreed to plead guilty to bank and tax fraud. Ippei Mizuhara is accused of stealing $16 million from Ohtani to cover his own gambling losses. He faces up to 33 years in prison. Well, after 60 years on the road, GM tonight is retiring the Chevy Malibu. GM says it will halt production this fall as it makes the transition to electric vehicles. More than 10 million Malibus sold worldwide since 1964. When we come back here tonight, the babies born just hours apart, same hospital. You're not going to believe what one family named their boy and what the other family named their little girl. Finally tonight, meet the newborns, Johnny Cash and June Carter. Tonight in Huntsville, Alabama, north of Birmingham, two families celebrating two newborns at Huntsville Hospital for Women and Children. The babies were born on the same day, the same hospital. The families did not know each other. The newborn boy was named Johnny Cash. The newborn girl down the hall named June Carter. Their full names Johnny Cash Davis, June Carter Clark. Apparently the families share a love of music. The babies born just hours apart, and when the families found out, they could not believe it. All four parents, fans of Johnny Cash and June Carter. The famous 1966 duet, Jackson. 60 years later, a new Johnny Cash and June Carter together. Johnny holding the guitar, June holding the microphone, their first photo shoot, and both asleep in the guitar case, right here tonight.
Hi David, this is Sophie, June Carter's mom, and this is baby June Carter.
June Carter and her mother Sophie.
We loved the moment of meeting Johnny Cash's parents, and we have loved getting to connect with them.
Johnny Cash and his mother Nicole.
I'm very excited about staying friends and making opportunities for these guys to spend time together and grow up together.
Tonight, both families telling us most of all they are grateful for their healthy babies, but they do love their names too.
You never know how lifelong friendships can start, and these sweet babies and us parents will always have a forever bond. Bye David.
Bye-bye, and can't wait to hear their voices when they get a little older. No pressure. Good night.
Thank you for making World News Tonight with David Moore, America's most watched newscast.
I'm Amna Nabaz.
And I'm Jeff Bennett. On the NewsHour tonight, the Biden administration puts a hold on sending thousands of bombs to Israel over concerns about how the weapons would be used in a Rafah offensive.
College students share their views on language, safety, and what's considered free speech amid protests against the war in Gaza.
And a closer look at the move by the federal judge overseeing former President Donald Trump's classified documents case to indefinitely postpone the start of his trial.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has guest station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the NewsHour. The Biden administration has suspended delivery of thousands of bombs to Israel, a rare move by a White House that has said its commitment to Israel is, quote, ironclad. Israel seized the Rafah border crossing from Gaza into Egypt on Monday and said it would invade Rafah City if Hamas does not release the hostages it holds by week's end.
Criticism of the suspension from many Republicans and some Democrats was swift. Speaker Mike Johnson and Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell co-signed a letter to the president denouncing the delay. The Biden White House also delayed delivery to Capitol Hill of a congressionally mandated report on whether or not the Israeli military is adhering to international humanitarian law. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin defended the weapons pause at a Senate hearing this morning before being interrupted by pro-Palestinian protesters.
We're going to continue to do what's necessary to ensure that Israel has the means to defend itself. But that said, we are currently reviewing some near-term security assistance shipments in the context of unfolding events in Rafah. Some of the security assistance that we're providing
Following all of this is our Nick Schifrin, who joins me here at the desk tonight. Nick, good to see you. Let's just start with what exactly the administration has suspended here.
The administration froze the shipment of 3,500 American bombs to Israel. These are weapons that were already... Thank you.
We're going to hear perspectives now on all of this from two members of Congress. First, Senator Chris Van Hollen, a Democrat from Maryland. He's a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and I spoke with him earlier today. Senator Van Hollen, welcome to the NewsHour.
It's good to be with you. Thank you for having me.
You have for months been urging President Biden to do more, to use the administration's leverage to pressure Israel to change the way it's prosecuting the war in Gaza to limit civilian suffering. What then do you make of this move now to pause a shipment of some 3,500
salt into Rafah City? He also said he would restrict the shipment of artillery shells if Israel takes that step.
In the day's other headlines, the House of Representatives voted overwhelmingly tonight to keep House Speaker Mike Johnson in his job. Georgia Republican Marjorie Taylor Greene had moved to oust Johnson for pushing Ukraine aid and other actions that she and other far-right Republicans opposed.
By passing the Democrats' agenda and handcuffing Republicans' ability to influence legislation, our elected Republican Speaker Mike Johnson has aided and abetted the Democrats and the Biden administration in destroying our country.
Democrats joined the overwhelming majority of Republicans in supporting Johnson. A Georgia state appeals court will consider former President Donald Trump's bid to oust the district attorney in his election interference trial. That decision today could mean the trial gets delayed past the November election. Mr. Trump is appealing the trial judge's ruling that let DA Fani Willis stay on the case. The special prosecutor that she named stepped aside after acknowledging they'd had a romantic relationship. Parts of the Midwest surveyed the damage today after a night of extreme weather that spawned tornadoes. 3 twisters struck in Michigan, including in the town of Portage, with reports of others in Indiana and Ohio, as well as West Virginia. One of the Michigan storms obliterated a mobile home park and several businesses. It also tore the roof off a FedEx facility. No serious injuries were reported. But in Tennessee, officials there say a man was killed when high winds blew a tree into the vehicle he was in. In Ukraine, Russia unleashed a barrage of more than 50 missiles and drones overnight, ending a recent lull in attacks. Ukrainian officials say nearly a dozen energy facilities were hit, causing serious damage and blackouts. Several homes in the Kyiv and Kharkiv regions were also struck. But in Moscow, Russia's foreign ministry said the war could end soon under one condition.
What is needed for de-escalation? The European Union's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, already said it. He said that if you stop supplying weapons to the Kyiv regime, everything will be over in 2 weeks. That is the true formula for peace, voiced by the Westerners themselves.
The EU's Borrell did say this month that Ukraine would lose the war if it wasn't supplied with more weapons, but that he did not want that outcome. Also today, EU nations reached a tentative deal to let Ukraine use the proceeds from frozen Russian assets to buy weapons. An appeals court in Hong Kong has agreed to let officials ban a popular protest song called Glory to Hong Kong. Today's decision overturned an earlier ruling. The song was frequently sung during massive anti-government demonstrations in 2019. China's foreign ministry said today the ban will maintain national dignity.
This is not a diplomatic question. I would like to stress that stopping anyone from using or spreading the song in an attempt to incite division and insult the national anthem is a legitimate and necessary measure.
Banning the protest song is the latest step in Beijing's crackdown on civil liberties in Hong Kong. Here at home, the former interpreter for Los Angeles Dodgers star Shohei Ohtani pleaded guilty today to bank tax fraud and the theft of $17 million. Federal prosecutors say Ike Mizuhara used the money to cover gambling debts. He could face more than 30 years in prison. Concert promoter Live Nation has settled nearly all of the wrongful death lawsuits involving the 2021 Astro World Festival in Houston. 10 people were killed and fans surged toward the stage as rap star Travis Scott performed. A lawyer for Live Nation said today only one of the resulting suits is still active. The bankrupt cryptocurrency exchange FTX now says it will distribute at least $14.5 billion to creditors. In a court filing late Tuesday, the company announced it has the assets to cover what it owes and a little more. FTX collapsed in November 2022. Earlier this year, former CEO and founder Sam Bankman-Fried was sentenced to 25 years in prison for fraud. On Wall Street, stocks mostly drifted for a second day. The Dow Jones Industrial Average gained 172 points to close at 39,056. The Nasdaq fell 29 points. The S&P 500 was down a fraction. And there's something new in Statuary Hall at the U.S. Capitol, where each state displays its own prominent historical figures. Today, Arkansas unveiled a statue depicting civil rights leader and journalist Daisy Bates. She played a key role in desegregating the state's public schools. The state is also adding a statue of country music great Johnny Cash. They'll replace figures with Confederate and white supremacist backgrounds. Still to come on the NewsHour, Congress grills leaders of some of the nation's largest school districts about the rise in anti-Semitic incidents, and Ukrainians who lost limbs in the fight with Russia receive prosthetics and hope for the future as the war rages on.
This is the PBS NewsHour from WETA Studios in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
The ongoing debate around how colleges and cities are handling pro-Palestinian protests played out here in Washington, D.C. today. Early this morning, hours before Mayor Muriel Bowser was set to testify on Capitol Hill about this, police used pepper spray to clear encampments and crowds at George Washington University. Nearly 36 people were arrested. The hearing was later canceled. Over the last week, NewsHour producers visited that campus and others across the country, talking to students about why they're protesting, about the language being used, and the limits of free speech. Stephanie Tsai has our report.
Coast to coast. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Stephanie Tsai.
When do we want it? When do we want it?
While most of the national attention around protests and questions of anti-Semitism has been focused on college campuses, there have been concerns about incidents at some high schools too, and that was the focus of another charged hearing today on Capitol Hill. The hearing gave House Republicans a chance to confront officials from liberal cities about reports of anti-Semitism in their school districts. Lisa Desjardins has the report.
The subcommittee on early childhood, elementary, and secondary education will come to order.
After two high-profile hearings on anti-Semitism in higher education, House Republicans today shifted to K-12. The leaders of 3 public school districts in liberal ale will face this committee later in the month. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Lisa Desjardins.
After months of delays and closed-door hearings, the classified documents case against former President Donald Trump has been officially and indefinitely delayed by Judge Aileen Cannon. Our William Brangham takes a deeper look now at where things stand. William?
To many, this is considered much for helping us get through these legal matters.
My pleasure. In addition to shortages of weapons and artillery in its war with Russia, Ukraine faces a critical manpower problem. Its troops are weary after more than 2 years of fighting. Tens of thousands have been grievously wounded, and the military is struggling to replenish ranks. On a recent trip to Ukraine, producer Sam Lane and I reported on both of those challenges.
For 22-year-olds.
And that is the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Amna Nabaz.
And I'm Jeff Bennett. For all of us here at the PBS NewsHour, thank you for joining us and have a good evening.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by
Zero emissions by 2050. A Mexican court hears the alleged killer of Perth brothers Callum and Jake Robinson confess the murders to his girlfriend. Fiji's former Prime Minister and military dictator Frank Bainimarama sentenced to a year in jail. And a fleet of failed airline bombers begin leaving Australian airports after being repossessed. Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm Ros Childs. The federal government has released its future gas strategy today, saying that more gas will be needed as Australia works towards achieving net zero carbon emissions. Our political reporter Monty Boville joins us now from Parliament House. Hi Monty. So what can you tell us about this strategy?
Well, good afternoon. We know that Australia is working to transition to net zero emissions by 2050, and this strategy is sort of outlining what role gas plays in that transition. It has been released today by the Resources Minister, Madeleine King. Now, it basically paints the picture that gas will be a very important source of energy through to 2050 and beyond. The Resources Minister, Madeleine King, has made it clear that new sources of gas will be required to meet demand during this transition. So that means continued exploration, continued investment, and continued development into the sector. Now, she says that around 5 million homes around the country rely on gas for heating and energy, and she says that she wants to make gas affordable for those people. But that also relies on a more reliable supply, and a reliable supply needs investment. She says that doesn't necessarily come from government, but it certainly would need to come from the private sector. We have heard from the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, about this strategy today. Here's what he had to say.
What we seek to do is to provide a Commonwealth framework going forward. That's what we've done with our future gas strategy. And I think it's a very positive announcement that we've made today. It makes it clear that our future gas strategy is consistent with achieving net zero by 2050. And indeed, it's a necessary component of achieving net zero by 2050 as well.
Now, the strategy also includes some measures to limit emissions from gas production, which might alleviate some of the concerns from environmentalists around this, but certainly not all. We've already heard quite a bit of anger and opposition to this strategy this morning. We have heard from the Climate Council about this. Here's what they have to say.
The Albanese government really has a choice here. It can back clean industries, clean energy, and a future made in Australia that sees us take our place in a net zero global economy, or it can back new gas, but it can't do both.
So certainly that is some of the opposition that we have heard to this strategy already. The government said it is a really important strategy going forward, not only about the supply here in Australia, but also about the supply that Australia gives to countries around the world and around the region. We know that Australia is the biggest exporter of gas in the world, so certainly the government is keen for that to continue going forward as well, Ros.
A judge in northwest Mexico has outlined how a man allegedly robbed and killed Perth brothers Jake and Callum Robinson and their American travel companion Carter Road. The bodies of the three men were discovered days after they went missing on a surfing holiday in Baja California. North America correspondent Carrington Clark has the latest from Ensenada.
This morning in a small courtroom here in Ensenada, Jesus Gerardo sat impassively dressed in orange jumpsuit prison garb, chained to the floor and handcuffed as the judge outlined the prosecutor's case against him. The major development today is that his girlfriend, or now former girlfriend, has turned key prosecution witness. She alleges that El Cacas, as Jesus Gerardo is otherwise known, told her on the either day of or the day after the two Australian brothers, Jake and Callum Robinson, and their friend Carter Road were killed, that he had, and I'm paraphrasing here, screwed up 3 gringos. When she asked him what he meant, he said, "I killed them." He then told her that they had on them huge amounts of money and electronics, which he had stolen. He gave her a cell phone that belonged to one of the 3 men, and then took her outside to show her her vehicle, which he had been driving the day before, and showed her the new tyres that allegedly had come off the vehicle that the Robinson brothers and their friend had been driving. The prosecution case is that El Cacas, along with, at this point, unknown other people, murdered the 3 men on the cliff top in remote parts of Baja California. They've then moved those bodies to a well about 6 or 7 kilometres is the journey, but 2 kilometres is about the distance as the crow flies. They've thrown them into this well about 15 metres deep. Prosecutors claim that at the campsite a huge amount of physical evidence was able to be recovered, including a bullet and also a tooth. Now, the DNA testing continues, the forensic testing continues, but Jesus Gerardo has been remanded in custody for at least the next 6 months. He's scheduled to have another hearing on November the 8th. We are expecting his charges to be upgraded. At the moment, he's still only charged with being responsible for the kidnapping of the 3 men, but we are expecting those charges to be upgraded to murder in the coming days or weeks. And the major question is whether or not other people are going to be charged over these crimes. Now, Ari Giselle, the former girlfriend of the accused, is also currently in custody. She was arrested in relation to the disappearances, but she was only, as they were then, but she has only been charged with drug offences and now does appear to have become a key part of the prosecutor's case. The judge also said that she says that she is a survivor of domestic violence. She accuses El Cacas of mentally and physically abusing her, and the judge said that that will need to be taken into account with the way that this case proceeds from here.
Carrington Clark there. The United States is reviewing its weapons packages to Israel and has now confirmed it paused 1 bomb shipment last week over Israel's offensive in southern Gaza. Israel is moving forward with its operation, with tanks seen firing in the direction of the densely packed city of Rafah. Several children were taken to hospital, with locals saying they were hit by Israeli shelling.
We were walking and a shell landed on us. We're in the middle of Rafah. The artillery hit us and a belt of fire and missiles targeted us today, and with your eyes you saw them. All children. No one was military or had anything to do with a political party.
The IDF has released video, it says, shows its troops on the ground in Rafah. The border crossing to Egypt there remains closed after the Israeli army captured the main entry point for humanitarian aid. In Washington, the US Defense Secretary says the delay in near-term security assistance to Israel was due to unfolding events in southern Gaza.
Israel should launch a major attack into Rafah without accounting for and protecting the civilians that are in that battle space. And again, as we have assessed the situation, we paused 1 shipment of high payload munitions. And again, I think we've also been very clear about the steps that we'd like to see Israel take to account for and take care of those civilians before major combat takes place.
Global Affairs editor John Lyons is with me in the studio. So, John, how significant is this move by the US?
Rob, I think it's tokenistic. I don't think it'll mean anything really. There's been tens of thousands of bombs dropped by Israel on Gaza since October 7, many of them, or most of them, supplied by the United States. It really doesn't mean much. I think it's a tokenistic effort. I think the president is playing to a domestic audience. Now it's become almost as big an American domestic story, this, as it is foreign policy. He's bleeding a lot of Democrat support in big states like Michigan. The Arab American community is very angry, believes that America's been complicit in war crimes in Gaza, and so I think he needs to try to do something to win back some of that support. Whether or not that'll be enough, who knows? But it won't mean anything in terms of the number of civilians being killed in Gaza. That will continue.
How have previous US administrations dealt with Israel on issues like this?
Well, some have been tougher. For example, President Reagan in 1982. I mean, he's, everybody remembers him as this great conservative Republican president. In 1982, Israel was bombing Lebanon and Beirut in particular, and hitting a lot of civilian targets in Beirut. And President Reagan had 2 phone calls with the Prime Minister of Israel at the time, Menachem Begin, and just said very clearly, stop. If you don't stop, we will withdraw a lot of our munitions to you, and we'll review the relationship with Israel. Within hours, Israel stopped bombing civilian targets. So it has happened in the past, but we don't have a president with that sort of strength on Israel as President Reagan.
John, what's the latest on the humanitarian situation?
The latest, Ros, is it's just going from bad to worse. It's got worse in the last few days because, of course, the Rafah crossing is now essentially closed. Famine is now full-blown, to quote the World Food Programme's Cindy McCain. In the north, it's catastrophic, and she believes that the famine is spreading to the centre and the south. People are desperate. Children are dying. 26 hospitals no longer function. They've been destroyed. The water system doesn't function. Communication system doesn't function. Roads don't function. There's not enough food or water. It's desperate.
The ground invasion, meanwhile, into Rafah creeps forward?
I think it's happening by stealth. I think Israel has begun the invasion of Rafah, but they're doing it bit by bit. The tanks in the south, and they're doing special operations bit by bit in the eastern suburbs of Rafah. So it's begun, but it's not the big ground invasion. That's a concession, I think, to the United States.
John, thank you. A man has been arrested after allegedly stabbing his former partner outside a gym in an inner Sydney suburb. Let's go to our reporter, Brooke Chandler, now. So, Brooke, what can you tell us about today's arrest?
Afternoon, Ros. Police have revealed that a 45-year-old man handed himself into DY Police Station around 7:50 this morning. He was then arrested and taken to Manly Police Station, where he's being questioned at the moment. Now, this is all relating to an alleged stabbing attack here in Alexandria. It all happened around midday yesterday at the gym behind me. A 39-year-old woman had just finished her workout, and eyewitnesses say she was walking in the gym's underground car park when she was allegedly attacked and stabbed multiple times. She has injuries to her upper back, neck and ear, and was treated by paramedics before she was taken to hospital. Now, Ros, I can also tell you that in the last hour, detectives have returned to the scene here, and although they have already reviewed CCTV footage, it's believed that they are speaking with the gym's management.
And how's the victim doing, Brooke?
Yeah, this morning I've been told that the victim is still stable and in hospital. What happened to her is being treated as a domestic violence related incident because police believed that her alleged attacker was a former partner. This morning the gym has reopened, and here is what some early morning gym goers had to tell me about how they were feeling.
It's normally sort of really busy, sort of between 7 and 9, and I got here this morning and it was a lot quieter than normal. So I don't know, maybe it was just a Thursday. I don't know, maybe people saw the footage and thought I'd give it a miss today. Maybe they're expecting a lot of police or something, I'm not sure.
I honestly, when I heard about it, I was like, oh, okay, like, it seems like this, I don't want to call it a trend, but it sounds like it's been happening quite often. And actually, in the area that I live in, also a similar case happened as well. So definitely worrying that it's becoming more frequent.
As you heard there, Ros, this incident has shocked the inner city community here. New South Wales Premier Chris Minns spoke earlier this morning and said that he is concerned with the rate of domestic violence-related incidents.
It's important to say that these events are not rare either. They are common, and the number and frequency of domestic violence offences in New South Wales represents an absolute emergency in the state.
Just to reiterate, Ros, there have been no charges laid, but questioning over the attack is underway.
Thanks, Brooke. The highly anticipated murder trial focusing on the deaths of two campers in Victoria's High Country is expected to get underway today. Police allege Russell Hill and Carol Clay met foul play during a trip to the Wonnangatta Valley in March 2020. Victoria Police launched a major search for the pair and later carried out a homicide investigation. In November 2021, police charged former Jetstar pilot Greg Lynn with 2 counts of murder. Mr. Lynn is fighting the charges and has pleaded not guilty. The Supreme Court trial could run for several weeks. A jury of at least 12 people will be chosen before prosecutors and defence lawyers make their opening addresses. The WA government is expected to announce another massive surplus today in the state's first budget since the shock resignation of Mark McGowan. But how big the surplus will be and what will the government put that money towards? For more on that, I'm joined by the State Political reporter Kian Burke. Hi, Kian. So what can we expect?
Ros, at the back end of last year, the government was already predicting a surplus around $3 billion, but that was based on quite conservative estimates of the iron ore price, which of course underpins the WA economy in many ways and is a significant contributor to the budget's bottom line. The iron ore price has stayed much higher than those predictions, so the government will almost certainly have a lot more money to play with. The predictions are, at least a surplus beginning with a 3, potentially towards the top end of that range. The government has promised this will be a budget focused on delivering cost of living relief to people who have been doing it tough for quite some time now, but we're yet to see, the big key cost of living feature of this budget. We've seen about $1 billion dished out to various efforts to boost housing supply, particularly around social and affordable housing, also bringing empty homes back onto the market. There has been money for parents of school children to help them with cost of living pressures, but the government has remained tight-lipped on many of the other measures. Here's a little bit of what Premier Roger Cook told Parliament yesterday.
See cost of living relief. You'll see a focus on housing, and you'll see significant investments in healthcare. We want to continue to make sure that we put Western Australians first. We will do what's right for WA.
Any hints, Kian, then, of what that cost of living relief might look like?
Well, lots of people are expecting a 4th power bill credit. The government has given out 3 in recent years. They've been generally well received for people doing it tough. The expectation is that with significant amounts of money to play with, there'll be some money for that and maybe some other cost of living measures to show people that they really are taking the cost of living crisis seriously. But with an election just under a year away that the government will be keenly aware of and focusing on, we can expect to see money squirreled away, perhaps to dish out closer to election day to help in that campaign. The government's got a significant majority here. There are only 6 opposition MPs in the lower house. The government will certainly lose some of the seats it holds to the opposition, but with so much money in the coffers, you would expect them to be putting a decent amount of that towards trying to keep some of those seats. But we'll find out exactly what that will look like when Rita Saffioti hands down her first budget as Treasurer later today.
Yeah, thanks. The NRMA says Australian drivers have been paying record high prices for fuel this year, and it's starting to take a toll on families already struggling with the rising cost of living. Reporter Keely Johnson has more from Newcastle.
According to the NRMA, petrol prices in Australia have been consistently rising and breaking numerous records for the past 2 years now. And that's, 2 years ago, the Ukraine-Russian war started, and that's had a prolonged impact on oil prices internationally. Now, just last month, Sydney recorded its highest ever daily average for regular unleaded petrol with an average of $2.23 a litre. It's quite an alarming figure, and it's not isolated. A lot of other capital cities last month saw big highs, daily averages. Brisbane, Adelaide, also Melbourne saw prices soar past $2.25 a litre. And it's starting to impact people already struggling in the cost of living crisis. I'm based in Newcastle, the biggest regional city in New South Wales, and I was keen to get out, chat to people, see how they were feeling. I spoke to a young apprentice, and he said that he got his licence just over a month ago, but he hasn't yet been able to actually fill up his tank fully because he can't afford it, and when he needs to fill up, it puts in about $10 to $15. I also spoke to a woman out at Maitland, and she said she's a single mum, she's struggling to afford fuel prices, and now she's turning to public transport because analysis by the NRMA shows that the average Aussie household spends about more than $100 a week on fuel, and that equates to about $5,500 a year. But that's, of course, including metro and regional areas. When you take out metro and look just at regional, that average tends to explode because regional areas, they have less fuel stations to choose from, longer commutes, and also less public transport options. So they are really struggling in regional Australia, and especially here in regional New South Wales, the people that I've spoken to. But there are some tips to find cheaper fuel. Now, when I'm driving around Newcastle, and a lot of consumers may have this experience too, you can be driving down a street and you'll see a petrol station advertising one price, and then 5 k's down the road you see a completely other price. And that's because in Australia, fuel prices aren't regulated, and petrol stations can effectively charge whatever they like for the product. So a way to make sure you're always going to the cheaper alternative is by using apps, comparison apps. It's what a lot of people that I spoke to said was a game changer in their life. In New South Wales, there's the Fuel Check app. That's by the New South Wales government because it's a requirement for all petrol stations to upload their prices in real time, and then you can jump on the app and actually see what prices are where and where you should go to find the cheapest fuel. And the other tips include things like just filling up when and where you see cheaper fuel, and also seeking out a range of different fuel discounts offered through supermarkets and other retailers.
Keely Johnson there. Fiji's former Prime Minister Frank Bainimarama has been jailed for 1 year by the country's High Court for perverting the course of justice. Our reporter Lithe Mavono is in Suva and joins us now. Hi Lithe, so tell us about this case.
Roz, this case is centered around the University of the South Pacific behind me, where in 2019, finance staff asked for police investigations into what they saw as mismanagement of millions of dollars worth of funding. Now, former Prime Minister Frank Bainimarama instructed City Vending Hall to halt those police investigations into the university, which belongs to the Pacific Islands Forum, of which Australia is a member. He has been convicted and now is sent away for a year in the Namboro Corrections Facility just outside of Suva City, where he will be in prison for at least a year. Former Police Commissioner City Vending Hall, who was charged with a more serious charge of abuse of office, will be in jail for 2 years for his part in directing detectives to stop investigating the University of the South Pacific. The men were led away today in what was a very surreal atmosphere at the High Court in the capital, Suva.
But this comes, Lithe, just 2 weeks after a lower court set the former Prime Minister free.
That's right. This has been a long, drawn-out case, with the initial hearing taking place in the Magistrates Court in early last year. However, in October, the two men were acquitted of the charges, which state prosecutors took up to the High Court to appeal. So it's been a little bit of a back and forth few months for us as we watched both the acquittal get appealed and then eventually the sentence, or lack thereof, one that was held in March. So, however, today the Chief Justice did sentence the two men. Bainimarama was sentenced to 3 years, but with mitigating factors that came down to only a year, and City Vending Hall will be inside with him for 2 years.
And what was the feeling like there in Suva when the decision came down?
Well, for people who have been following the case, it's been quite surreal. It's been long drawn out. But for the families and supporters of former Prime Minister Frank Bainimarama, it was quite a despondent atmosphere. There was a lot of sadness. There was a lot of quiet for the first time in this almost 2-year trial. And there was most definitely tears as his supporters sang hymns while they watched the police lead these two once powerful men away to jail. Frank Bainimarama did enjoy quite a lot of power in the 16 years that he was head of the government of Fiji. So today was quite an unusual day for the people of Fiji.
Lithe, thank you. Repossessed Bonza planes are being removed from Australia, with the fate of the Queensland-based carrier still unclear. Jessica Ross reports from the Sunshine Coast.
Bonza plane CFLHI, also known as Bruce, has departed our shores bound for Honolulu. It left just after 9 o'clock from the Sunshine Coast Airport here. The flight's running about 33 minutes late, but given this is not a commercial flight, I don't think anyone is complaining. This is part of the repossession proceedings, which began last Tuesday and sparked the mass cancellation of flights across the country, leaving thousands of passengers stranded. We've since learned about 60,000 customers lost money on flights, 323 employees are owed their pay, along with 120 trade creditors. The company, the budget airline, is now in voluntary administration. Now, just last night, an urgent staff meeting was held where we understand they were told that there is a potential buyer for this company, a white knight if you like, who could swoop in and buy it. But they'll have to try and run the operations without these planes because the administrators and Bonza can do nothing to stop them from being repossessed and taken overseas, as we have seen this morning, due to the financial trouble of the overseas backer of this company. Bonza had been a much welcome addition to the aviation market, providing direct connections to regional towns, some of which had never had direct flights before. But sadly, things have not panned out as a hope for the company with, as we've seen, the flights cancelled
cancelled and continue to remain grounded. For now, the two other planes, Shazza and Malk, remain here at the airport, but their days are also numbered. The administrators announced on Tuesday the flights would remain suspended at least until Wednesday next week, but that's highly unlikely now that they will resume then, if at all.
Let's get finance news now with David Chow. Hi there, David. Australia's largest bank has reported its results. How were they?
Yeah, so Commonwealth Bank is the last of the big four to report either their quarterly or their half-year results, and one thing is clear, their profits are going down, Ros. So take Commonwealth Bank today, for instance. It reported a quarterly profit of $2.4 billion, which is a lot of money, but it's a 5% drop compared to a year ago, which is a lot of money too. So CBA, like the other banks, has been a major beneficiary of rising property prices, which means customers have to take out bigger mortgages. So they've reported home lending volumes up 3%, so the number of home loans being issued, but their margins have gone down. It's been hurt by intense competition in the lending space. Customers on mortgages are not so loyal these days because of rising interest rates. They've been shopping around, refinancing, looking for better rates elsewhere. Now, the bank, CBA, also reported a gradual rise in doubtful debt over the past year, and there's also been a rise in the value of debt that's been outstanding for more than 90 days in violation of personal loans, credit cards, and home loan repayments. So, bottom line, there's more customers that are falling behind on their repayments with these pretty high interest rates we've been seeing these days. So, as for how it compares to the others, so quarterly profit, Commonwealth Bank is down 5%, and in recent weeks, ANZ says half-year profit is down 4%, which is pretty comparable, but NAB and Westpac did a bit worse. NAB profit down 12% over the half year, and Westpac down 16% over the half year. So, yeah, definitely these results, these falling profits show their margins are increasingly under pressure, Ros.
How are the markets doing, David?
Not so well. In fact, the losses have intensified since the first trading hour, no doubt because of the banks dragging the market down. So the All Ords and ASX 200, both of them are down quite steeply, down 0.9% each, with most sectors in the red. Now, Commonwealth Bank's share price is down quite sharply after the bank reported its drop in quarterly profit. JB Hi-Fi and Super Retail Group, which is the company behind Rebel Sport and Super Cheap Auto, they're some of the worst performers today after both retail groups reported weak sales results as cash-strapped consumers cut back on shopping. And Westpac, you'll notice, has plunged more than 5% because it's trading ex-dividend. That means if you didn't own Westpac shares before today, you won't receive its next dividend. Meanwhile, shares of gas companies have risen quite sharply today, with the federal government's future gas strategy committed to backing the use of gas beyond 2050. Now, the Australian share market's weak performance comes after a mixed performance on Wall Street this morning, with the Dow Jones up 0.4%, the S&P 500 dead flat, while the Nasdaq fell by 0.2%. In commodities, the price of gold has risen to $2,309 an ounce, and on oil markets, Brent crude is below $84 a barrel. And finally, the Aussie dollar is a tiny bit weaker. It's buying 65.76 US cents. And Ros, that's the latest in finance news.
Thanks, David. To some breaking news now, Gold Coast Suns defender Will Powell has been suspended for 5 AFL matches for using a homophobic slur against a Brisbane Lions player during last weekend's match at the Gabba. The Suns say Powell told club officials what he'd said during the match and immediately apologised to the player involved. That news just in. Musician and director Ignatius Jones, who died at his Philippines home aged 67, is being remembered for his contribution to Australian arts. Jones rose to fame as lead singer of 70s rockers Jimmy and the Boys. He later became the director of major Sydney events, including the New Year's Eve fireworks, Mardi Gras, Vivid, and was segment director of the 2000 Olympics opening ceremony. You can keep up to date at news.abc.net.au and on ABC iView. Here are the top stories on
President Joe Biden says the U.S. won't supply weapons for Israel to attack Rafah over concern for the safety of the more than 1 million civilians sheltering there. Russia's latest airstrikes put pressure on Ukraine's power grid. The EU could use Russian frozen assets to finance Ukraine's defense. And the Olympic flame is now burning in France. After landing in Marseille, it will cross 65 cities before arriving in Paris for the official start of the Games in July. Hello and welcome to the France 24 newsroom in Paris. I'm Clarisse Fortuny. President Joe Biden warns Israel the United States will not supply offensive weapons to use for a major assault on Rafah, citing the well-being of more than 1 million civilians sheltering there is at risk. The U.S. government already delayed a shipment of thousands of bombs to Israel. Fraser Jackson has more from Washington.
On Sunday, we had unconfirmed reports that the US had paused the weapon shipments to Israel. Over the next few days, the government were quite quiet about that, not commenting on it, but now we have word from the chief executive of the United States, Joe Biden, in an interview with CNN saying, quote, civilians have been killed in Gaza as a consequence of those bombs and other ways in which they go after population centers. Joe Biden then talking about the 2,000-pound bombs that his administration paused to Israel. Around 1,800 of them have been on pause. Now, the future of that shipment was in doubt, with it unknown when it would be unpaused, but we might have gotten a clue from Joe Biden in this interview. He continued, I made it clear that if they, meaning the Israelis, go into Rafah, I'm not supplying the weapons that have been used historically to deal with Rafah, to deal with the cities. This then a big departure from Joe Biden's stance just even a few days ago, where he said he had ironclad support for Israel. Now, the government will still continue in that line, but as press brought up at the briefing at the State Department on Wednesday, it's hard to see how they can have ironclad support while also backing away from the weapons that Israel says it needs. Joe Biden then likely to continue supplying the defensive weapons, things like the Iron Dome missiles that it needs, but drawing a line if these weapons were to be used in Rafah. This is likely to anger the opposition on Capitol Hill. The Republicans are already accusing Joe Biden and his administration of creating daylight between the US and one of its largest allies, Israel, but it's likely to be music to the ears of those in the Democratic Party, the growing chorus, who say that Israel aid needs to be conditioned.
And meanwhile, the Israeli military reopened the Kerem Shalom crossing into Gaza after it was closed on Sunday. Although no trucks have been able yet to enter through the vital gateway, the UN is hoping the reinstating of the crossing will ease the suffering of people in Gaza, where famine is imminent. Yinka Oyeteyade has more.
Daily handouts get underway in Rafah. Weighing heavily on the minds of aid workers is the closure of the city's crossing, once a critical gateway for humanitarian aid in Gaza. People at this charity kitchen fear they'll be forced to wrap up operations if the Rafah crossing isn't reopened soon.
It might be our final day here. The situation in Rafah is extremely challenging. There's a shortage of fuel and gas and no available options.
This is humanitarian work. It is forbidden to close it. Closing it would be for the sake of the occupier. There are no crossings or anything. What are we supposed to eat?
The shutters came down on the Rafah crossing as Israeli forces seized the Gaza side of the border with Egypt, this ahead of a planned invasion of the city. The crossing is the only entry point for fuel urgently needed to power generators at hospitals. On X, the head of the WHO is warning that hospitals in the south of the enclave only have 3 days of fuel left. Earlier, aid officials had cautioned the closure of Rafah and the Kerem Shalom crossing, another main conduit for assistance, could force the collapse of aid operations. Kerem Shalom has now reopened according to Israeli authorities. It was shut after a Hamas rocket attack killed 4 Israeli soldiers nearby on Sunday. The UN says aid still hasn't entered in as of 12 p.m. local time, with all workers on the Palestinian side having fled amid Israel's military operation in the area.
Now to another war. Russia's latest barrage of strikes on Ukraine's power grid triggered fresh warnings of blackouts and electricity rationing. The attack on 7 Ukrainian regions left 3 people injured, including an 8-year-old girl. Homes and the country's rail network were also damaged.
Air raid sirens cut through the nighttime calm in the Ukrainian capital. Russia has just launched a major new attack on the country. 76 drones and missiles fired, 80% of them intercepted according to Kyiv. Residents in Zaporizhia woke up to the attacks.
The morning was loud and we could hear rockets flying past our house in Zaporizhia. And then there was a very strong explosion, after which the windows in our house were blown out.
Also among the strike targets were the city of Lviv in the west, Poltava in the east, and Kherson in the south. Homes fell victim to the attacks, and so did parts of Ukraine's energy sector, leaving several towns without power. The country's national supplier is warning of more blackouts, outages people in Ukraine are already so familiar with. It's now the 5th assault on the country's energy supply in just over a month.
And meanwhile, Ukraine's efforts to conscript enough men to fight Russia continue. Its parliament just passed a bill on Wednesday that would allow some convicts to enlist in the army in return for a chance of parole, part of a push to generate fresh manpower for Kiev's outnumbered and exhausted troops. Laurent Berthéchet has more.
It still needs the president's signature, but Ukraine's convict mobilization bill, which was approved by parliament on Wednesday, could soon be passed into law. It will allow prisoners to enlist in the military in exchange for a chance at parole, unless they've committed a serious crime.
Some of the categories of convicts are excluded. Those who committed premeditated murder, negligent homicide under the influence of alcohol, and high treason, for instance.
Lawmakers say the scheme will only apply to convicts serving sentences of 3 years or less, and will take place on a fully voluntary basis. Those selected will be placed in a special unit under the supervision of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. The law, which is only expected to generate a few thousand additional soldiers, comes as Ukraine desperately attempts to boost its military ranks. Last month, a bill introduced by Volodymyr Zelensky already lowered the draft mobilization age from 27 to 25. The country is currently bracing for a big Russian offensive later this spring, and more than weapons and technology, analysts say manpower remains its biggest challenge to stave off a much larger foe, which has been drafting tens of thousands of inmates from its prisons since the start of the war.
And after manpower finance, all the windfall profits made from frozen Russian central bank assets in the EU could be used for Ukraine's defense, and if approved, 90% of the proceeds will go into an EU-run fund for military aid for Ukraine. Around $300 billion worth of Russian financial assets were frozen after Moscow's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Chinese President Xi Jinping continues his European tour and he visited Serbia and Hungary this Wednesday. Earlier in the day, he met with Serbia's president, and the two leaders agreed to follow what they called a shared future. Xi Jinping's trip is seen as an effort by China to strengthen ties with Eastern European countries that are pro-Russia and in which China has invested heavily. Monty Francis explains.
A warm handshake between the presidents of China and Serbia as Xi Jinping and Alexander Vučić forge in writing what they called an ironclad partnership.
Our two countries firmly support each other's core interests and concerns, and cement the political foundation for the building of a shared future.
China and Serbia signing 29 separate agreements on legal, regulatory, and economic cooperation. The accords follow a deal penned last year, making Serbia the first European country in years to enter a free trade agreement with Beijing.
Despite the fact that we are often pressured by many of the world's most powerful nations, I am lucky that we have always had a friend in the People's Republic of China.
Since 2020, China has been Serbia's single largest investor and runs several mines and factories across the country. In return, Serbia, along with Hungary, has been Europe's strongest supporter of China's massive Belt and Road infrastructure project. Xi's visit, an apparent source of pride for locals, with Serbia one of only 3 stops on the Chinese president's European tour.
We have friends all over the world, but China is a little bigger than the rest. We owe the president our respect. He stays for 2 days. It's a nice surprise that he chose to come here.
The two leaders also showing a joint wariness of the United States, with Xi's arrival on Tuesday marking the 25th anniversary of a mistaken airstrike by the U.S. and NATO during the Kosovo War. The strike destroyed the Chinese embassy in Belgrade and killed 3 Chinese journalists.
The story of that infamous kiss is not over. Former Spanish Football Federation chief will stand trial for kissing national team player Jenny Hermoso without her consent. Luis Rubiales faces 1 count of sexual assault, which carries 1 year prison term. Sarah Morris is in Madrid with more.
Well, the High Court basically accepted the public prosecutor's recommendation that Luis Rubiales, the former Spanish Football Federation chief, should go to trial, and he'll be basically tried for sexual assault for that kiss where he grabbed Jenny Hermoso's face and planted a kiss on her lips. He'll also face an additional charge. He'll be in the dock for coercion, and that is basically because the witnesses, including Hermoso herself, say that after he gave that kiss, he tried to put pressure on her and those close to her to back his version of events. Now, Hermoso has said that that kiss was not consensual, and Rubiales, we expect him to continue his claim when he goes to trial that basically he said to her on that stand, shall we have a quick peck? And he claims that she said yes, and he denies those charges of coercion. Now, he could for these charges face a prison term of 1 year and 18 months for those 2 charges if he is found guilty. The judge may conclude that he doesn't have to go to prison for a first-time offence, but in fact Rubiales was detained at an airport, at Madrid airport last month under another ongoing investigation in relation to whether he potentially accepted backhanders or kickbacks for taking the Super Cup from Spain to Saudi Arabia, and there are charges also that he denies. So another poor news for Rubiales.
And that's the end of this edition. Thank you for watching.
This is Asia First.
Good Thursday morning, it's 9 a.m. here in Singapore. I'm Julie Yu. Our top story this hour. U.S. President Joe Biden says he will stop sending weapons to Israel if it launches a major invasion of Rafah. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin earlier confirmed the U.S. pause amid a review over fears that civilian lives were being put at risk in Gaza.
Israel should launch a major attack in Rafah without accounting for and protecting the civilians that are in that battle space.
China okay. Also, this morning, the final leg of Xi Jinping's European tour. The Chinese president lands in Hungary to mark 75 years of diplomatic ties between Beijing and its closest EU ally. Plus, making India a manufacturing powerhouse. We take a look at one of Narendra Modi's biggest projects as he seeks a rare third term in the nation's ongoing general election.
The China trade also in focus this morning, with exports expected to recover, reversing March slump. I'm Elizabeth Nyo with your business news, and we will look ahead to those April numbers. Plus, concerns over AI spending playing out in another earnings report. This time, ARM Holdings sees its share slip in extended trade after the UK-based chip designer issues lackluster projections for revenue this year. The U.S. President Joe Biden has for the first time acknowledged that American weapons shipped to Israel have killed civilians in Gaza in what could be a turning point in the conflict between Israel and Hamas.
In an exclusive interview with CNN, the U.S. President says Washington will stop sending bombs and artillery shells to Israel if Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu orders a major incursion into the southern Gaza city of Rafah.
Earlier, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin testified in a Senate hearing that one shipment of arms to Israel was paused over concerns about Israel's offensive into Rafah.
Israel should launch a major attack in Rafah without accounting for and protecting the civilians that are in that battle space. And again, as we have assessed the situation, we paused one shipment of high payload munitions. And again, I think we've also been very clear about the steps that we'd like to see Israel take to account for, take care of those civilians before major combat takes place.
Meantime, Hamas is sticking to its position on a truce proposal. Hamas officials said the militant group is unwilling to make more concessions to Israel in negotiations for a ceasefire. Talks continue in Cairo, attended by delegations from Hamas, Israel, the United States, and Qatar.
With strong words coming from Washington, Benji Heyer tells us whether Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu might be swayed in his decision to launch a major Israeli ground incursion into Rafah.
The United States finds itself in a difficult balancing act, to put it mildly. It's Israel's biggest financial and arms backer. Its support, we often hear, remains ironclad. It's a key ally in the region. The administration here says the country has a right to defend itself. At the same time, Joe Biden's been very clear that Israel shouldn't launch an attack into Rafah without protecting civilians. We're told by the White House that Israel's recent military activity in Rafah is limited in scope and duration. It doesn't yet amount to a full-scale ground offensive, and that distinction is key, given that President Biden's announced for the first time that he will stop sending some weaponry if Israel launches what's considered a major invasion. Already, the transfer of 2 types of Boeing-made precision bombs has been stalled. That was officially confirmed by Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin in a congressional hearing. He was keen to stress there's been no final determination on how to proceed with that shipment, so the move isn't about setting any sort of precedent. It's still been welcomed, though, by some lawmakers. Senator Bernie Sanders, formerly a presidential candidate, said the United States should be using its leverage in this way, but Israel's ambassador to the United Nations says the decision is very disappointing. Finally, there's also this detail. The executive branch of the government was technically required by today to notify Congress on whether Israel's violated international humanitarian law in this conflict. That report has been delayed, but its findings, when released, might bring about more calls to halt arms used in the Gaza war, and the US could be legally bound to reconsider its position. In other words, even if he's not swayed now, those reverberations would certainly be felt by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
Despite Washington's disapproval, Israel continues to bombard Rafah with what the military calls targeted rates. The US opposes an offensive on the southern Gaza city without new civilian safeguards. Israel claims it was opening 2 crossings to Rafah. One of them, the Karim Shalom crossing, was closed after a Hamas strike killed some Israeli troops. But the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, UNRWA, says aid has yet to enter.
As of now, no goods have come in for our use for our humanitarian operations, either through the Karim Shalom or the Rafah crossings into the Gaza strips. We are continuously engaging with all involved about the resumption of the entry of goods, including fuel, so that we can begin managing incoming supplies.
The WHO says hospitals in the southern Gaza Strip have only 3 days left of fuel left. And Rafah's largest hospital, El Nijah, is closed to avoid what happened to El Shifa in northern Gaza.
The Chinese President Xi Jinping has arrived in Hungary, the last stop of his tour of Europe. And the visit to what is seen as China's closest EU ally comes amid trade tensions with a region that's forging a more united voice with the U.S. Mr. Xi and his wife landed in Budapest, greeted by Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán. In a written speech on his arrival, the Chinese leader hailed 75 years of diplomatic ties. He described both sides as good friends and good partners of mutual trust, setting a fine example for building a new type of international relations. He says that they will jointly outline a new blueprint to steer ties to a higher level. Hungary was the first EU member to sign on to China's Belt and Road Initiative. A flagship project funded by Beijing is a railway linking Budapest to Serbia's capital, Belgrade. After several delays, it's expected to be fully completed next year. One section that's already running is in Serbia. That was Mr. Xi's previous stop. He held talks with Serbian leader Aleksandar Vučić. They signed a joint statement to upgrade their bilateral ties to a so-called community with a shared future from a comprehensive strategic partnership. Serbia is the first Balkan country to make the move. Mr. Xi wants to further deepen cooperation.
双方要坚定支持彼此核心利益和重大关切，夯实命运共同体建设的政治基石。
Čelično prijateljstvo između Srbije i Kine niko neće moći da raskine, mi smo veoma lojalni ljudi.
Sydney's Stern Murray tells us how strong relations between China and Serbia could impact the rest of Europe.
There really is a tense kind of geopolitical competition underway within this particular part of Europe. As I say, Serbia and others in that region have sought to try and join the European Union, but when it comes to issues like Ukraine, they have really looked at that conflict from a different perspective. You have not seen Serbia, for example, pouring huge volumes of weaponry and arms into Ukraine in the same way that the rest of Western Europe has. In fact, quite often at times you've seen Belgrade and Beijing having similar language in their diplomatic statements, saying that it requires diplomatic solutions and dialogue to bring an end to the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. And I think that you will see similar types of statements being made when President Xi now travels to Hungary. Again, Serbia and Hungary supporting Beijing in opposing some of those sanctions that have been applied on Moscow from both European Union and Washington.
And when it comes to East-West relations, misconceptions and misunderstandings can be hard to avoid. Tilly Edwards asked the former Australian Prime Minister Kevin Rudd about what he calls the remarkable degree of ignorance in America, the West and the West when it comes to China. Mr. Rudd is now ambassador to the United States.
What we find often between China and the United States is that a lot goes missing in translation. For example, looking at it from the China lens to begin with, China often says in its domestic propaganda that what we're currently in is in an age of the rise of the East and the decline of the West. And that's code language for the United States losing power, both militarily, economically, technologically, etc. Many of us, of course, don't regard that as an empirical observation, but nonetheless, it's an entrenched Chinese misperception of the current power, standing and status of the United States in the world. By reverse perception, in the US and the West, there is sometimes a view that China has a single view of the world. Whereas if we know anything about Chinese elite politics, we know that there are a range of different views within China, including on the proper direction and most appropriate direction for China's future economic development. And so therefore, it's important we have a more, shall we say, refined and calibrated view of reality on both sides of this divide.
Business News next with Liz Neo. You are focusing on the wage growth in Japan, a key focus of the BOJ.
Yeah, that's right. And real wages in Japan fell in March, marking 2 straight years of decline. But analysts say that the BOJ's goal for a wage price virtuous cycle remains intact. Plus, a Japanese automaker Toyota posts the highest ever profit for a Japanese company. But it warns it's not immune to challenges faced by its peers in Asia and Europe.
Don't miss our special coverage of the leadership transition in Singapore. After 2 decades at the helm, Mr. Lee Hsien Loong sits down for one last interview as the Prime Minister of Singapore.
Niger is currently facing a rapid increase in the number of meningitis cases compared to the same period last year. By mid-April, the country recorded 2,012 cases, with 123 deaths, according to the World Health Organization. Vaccination was launched in early May in Niamey. Amina Abubakar came with her child to get the jab. People are talking about this disease everywhere in Niamey, but not everyone has the means to pay to get vaccinated. So I'd say this is a very good initiative. Just like Amina, many families were enticed by the fact that vaccination is free of charge. The vaccine used is a new one and has the advantage of protecting targets against 5 strains, which are the main causes of meningitis in Niger. We started with the schools on Thursday and Friday. Then on Saturday and Sunday we moved into the neighborhoods. The population is coming and we're doing it in a calm atmosphere. Really, we haven't had any problems so far. The mobile unit teams say they have vaccinated 1,000 people in the city in 4 days. Unlike previous vaccines, the one used is a single dose.
The region of Niamey has recorded the highest number of cases so far this year, given the epidemic threshold was reached in 3 health districts. The Ministry of Public Health and Social Affairs filed a request to the International Coordinating Group ICG on vaccine provision to ask for operational support, and to respond to the epidemic, a vaccination campaign will be conducted in all 5 districts of the region.
The regions of Niamey, Agadez and Dosso are the most affected. Vaccination is for people aged 1 to 19.
Well, the current meningitis epidemic in Niger has caused the death of over 123 people. The vast vaccination campaign launched in Niamey by the World Health Organization hopes to reverse the contagion curve. Nigerians impatiently await the return of the raining season. Hundreds of them are turning up at each community vaccination center to receive their dose. As such, many expect the campaign to be extended to the whole country in the coming days.
The forests on the slopes of Mount Kenya have new inhabitants. They are the two antelopes bred in captivity that these conservation workers are preparing to release into the wild. Two might not look like much, but the total wild population of these antelopes, also known as the mountain bongo, is less than 100.
Have reintroduced them again on the Mount Kenya, within the Mount Kenya forest, which we know is a former bongo range. The bongos used to live there, and now today we witness another occasion where these animals again have been sent back to their wild home in their former range.
Mountain bongos used to roam the Mount Kenya region freely until poaching and habitat destruction greatly cut their numbers. Now they are listed as critically endangered. The Conservancy has reintroduced a total of 10 bongos in recent days, with up to 50 animals planned for release by 2025.
Poaching for bushmeat, then live trade for those who wanted to keep mountain bongos, and then also hunting because of their trophies, skin and horns. So that brought the numbers of bongos to go solo, and that crushed the population to less than 100 individuals, and its recovery has been so slow in the wild, and that's why now the only possible route for recovery was to breed the mountain bongo and then revive them.
Authorities say that the program is crucial to the survival of the species.
Copernicus, the EU's climate change agency, released data indicating that April 2024 was the hottest on record globally at 1.49 Celsius, above the average between 1991 and 2020. While EU experienced its second warmest April, other regions saw greater temperature increases, and most of Africa were particularly affected.
Temperature is yet another record-breaking month, and this means that the sequence, the streak of months, record-breaking months that started last year in June, is continuing, and now we are at 11 months. So that's one thing, and that's true for the global mean average, but it's also true for sea surface temperature.
In Morocco, the effect of rising temperatures are imminent as the country prepares for a heat wave forecasted to hit several provinces from Tuesday to Friday. The General Directorate of Meteorology issued an orange alert, warning of temperatures soaring between 40 and 44 degrees Celsius during this period. It's the 11th month that temperatures have broken previous records, according to the EU's climate change agency.
We'll see again and again El Nino and La Nina alternating with one another. We'll see cooler and wetter and drier years, but the tendency is what matters, and the tendency is towards a warmer climate.
This news comes as Morocco's ongoing struggle with drought now enters its 6th consecutive year.
Thank you for watching and privilege of your time. This is Amir Shakil 5858. I am Amir Woodman. Have a good life.